Florida.
When the last leaf of autumn has fallen to the ground, and the icy wind through the empty trees makes a howling sound. At first it drives you indoors, and then it drives you mad. That's when you know you need it, and you know you need it bad. You say it every summer, what makes it go so fast? And later on you wonder what makes the winter last. While the springtime you've been waiting for never comes somehow. That's when you know you need it, and you know you need it now. You need the sunshine and sea breeze, soft sand and palm trees of Florida. Florida, when you need it bad, we've got it good. When you need it bad, come to Florida, 'cause we got it good here. You need it bad.
Florida.
When the last leaf of autumn has fallen to the ground, and the icy wind through the empty trees makes a howling sound. At first it drives you indoors, and then it drives you mad. That's when...
Hey everybody, welcome to the very first episode of Water Talks. This is going to be an in-depth show that we're going to start doing every week, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into all of the problems plaguing Florida's water. And we wanted to start off with a commercial that, if you're of a certain age, you will remember seeing on television. And that was Florida. Florida, it lives in the minds of everybody in the world as the vacation spot. Why? Because you have Disney, you have all these amazing, beautiful things you can see. You've got these space shuttle launches, which some people like to come down and see. But most importantly, you have the water, whether you're boating on it, you're scuba diving in it, or you're just swimming in it. Everybody enjoys the water here. And Florida is very unique in the sense that it shares two very important bodies of water. Actually, three if you want to get technical down south, but mostly we're talking about the Gulf of Mexico, and we're talking about the Atlantic Ocean. These are two very diverse bodies of water that offer very diverse things, very diverse, but they also have very diverse needs on how to keep them going safely. Unfortunately, they've been compromised drastically over the last 50 to 100 years. But we're going to be focusing on the last 100 years or so that have culminated into this. So before we get started, I want to introduce myself. I'm your host, Eric Crown. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I did a documentary called Phosphate about the phosphate mining operations here in Florida back in 2019. And we continue to screen the movie and continue to share the movie with everybody in order to bring more and more awareness. And I'm somebody that's living with environmental cancer. So the environment's very important to me on a very selfish level that way. And I feel that even though Florida has some of the biggest water problems, it has some of the most amazing water activists. And I'd like to introduce you to one right now, who is our co-host and producer of the show. And we'd like to bring on our good friend, Sierra Williams. Hey, Sierra.
Hey, thanks for agreeing to do this talk with me. It's super important. I grew up part-time in South. If you live in Southwest Florida, you've probably noticed that the water isn't what it used to be. But what's the big picture here? And that's exactly what we're here to talk about.
Well, and I think it's very important because here we are, we're doing this podcast live in a couple different areas, but one of them is in the Southwest Florida Clean Water Movement Group. And that group has been around a long time, and there are a lot of people in this group, and I'm very excited to hear what everybody has to say, because This is a group of activists that have been talking about the water problems for so long now. As a matter of fact, when I came in to start learning about the water problems, this group, this clean water group, is the group that I came in and said, hey, this is where all the education is. And I started learning and making it my education amongst other resources. But I found it to be one of the most important resources because it had the resource of activists. So thank you for putting this show on, because it is so important that we get to talk about this and we get to save. It'd be really cool if our kids had the ability to experience what you experienced in Florida. They don't right now. So that's not going to happen. But what is going to happen on a more realistic note is maybe our grandkids, maybe their kids can have a chance at it. So that's why we're here. And that's why we're all here. That's why when Sierra and I promote and screen Phosphate everywhere. By the way, we never charge for tickets. It's always a free screening. The point of it is education. We travel all across the state and actually all across the world promoting clean water initiatives, and clean water thinking, clean water solutions. So often it's hard to think in clean water. And I don't know if that makes sense, but hopefully it will by the end of this show. Because we want to talk about, again, let's bring it back to Florida. Now, Florida, by the way, for everybody that lives in Florida, that grew up in Florida, that loves Florida, you already know what I'm about to tell you. Florida was ranked the second worst drinking water in the United States. Now that is bad. That's bad. And you're coming from a land of purity here. What's going on? What is happening? Let's talk a little bit about the history of Florida. And let's talk a little bit about the water's history and talk about the challenges it faces now. There are three primary adversaries to a clean environment inside of Florida. We're going to talk about all three. And over the course of our series that Sierra's put together for us to discuss, we're going to talk about each one in depth and then some. There's so many to talk about. There's too many topics than even potential for episodes. I'll lose my vocal cords by the time we do all of them, unfortunately. So we wanted to go back and, Sierra and I were talking about the really important aspect is that Florida, water is a reflection of the environment around it. So if water has a chance, it will. If water is given an opportunity, it will be clean. It even knows how to very often heal itself from a lot of issues. We often we have this mistake, I think, as humans that we can control nature, fix it, and then manage it, and somehow it's still going to work. I think a lot of us would probably agree that that's not quite right. Let's take a look back now, way, way, way back. Let's go to the way, way back machine. Take a look at Florida back before it was colonized. And we'll get into some of the colonizers, but this is before it was colonized, and there were a lot of different tribes living here. Now, this might not be the most accurate map, and if there are any mistakes in this map or anything you guys would like to add, please add it in the comments. We're here to learn, and we're all going to learn together. So the information that we're getting, we all need to learn from each other, because we are, as we always talk about, we're just everybody on earth we're one giant encyclopedia set. So here I am dating myself, the Florida commercial and the encyclopedia sets. So for the kids today, we are all Google. So we all need to learn from each other, because we've all had so much experience, knowledge, and research into what's happening that it would be impossible to do all of it. And these three industries we're going to talk about, the big three, know that already. But before the big three existed, Florida existed, and natural tribe life existed here. And it was really interesting. We were taking a look actually at some of these early villages. And again, this is before colonization. Sierra and I were just in Africa in the Maasai tribes, and they still have these types of villages that they call bomas that they live in. And it is a very old style of living that incorporates nature into the design. And one thing I wanted to talk about was that circular design real fast. So this circular design is used. This circular design is something that was brought back into use in American slaughterhouses by Temple Grandin, using this circular pattern, because when it's a circular pattern, you never know what's around the corner. Now, if you're a person, that's terrifying. So a lot of people wouldn't want to enter into those types of bomas or villages because there's an automatic like psychological psych out already in there. Unfortunately for cows, the system works in the slaughterhouse where they just aren't worried about what's around the corner, which is the problem, which was the problem back in Florida days as well, and which brings us to our days now. So we wanted to kind of show you some of these older images of the tribal life here. And you have to remember that the tribes were all over Florida, and they survived off the water. They survived off the water. Now, you couldn't even imagine, any of the fishermen that are here watching today, tell me if you could get that kind of a catch just by putting your net down anymore. The fish and the water around it is all degraded so terribly that almost everything's gone. I'm surprised these fisheries haven't collapsed yet. And I would like to hear from other fishermen about that here. Not other fishermen. I'm not a fisherman. I don't fish, but I'm curious what fishermen have to say about that, because working in conservation, we've seen fisheries collapse. Now, this is really interesting. This is the Calusa Mound House, and this was the original one, all built on shells, and we just thought that was really amazing because the Mound House has been preserved over all of this time, and the history has been preserved. Now, let's go back to this for a quick second. It is built on shells. Florida, it does not have a lot of soil. It is not a very soil-rich kind of place. It is mostly limestone, built on limestone. There's a lot of shells. So that requires some of everything actually in Florida to use chemicals, which is killing the water. So we want to kind of try to avoid that. Now, again, this is really amazing. Now, the Florida history even shows what it was like back then. And look at how clean that water is. If you go into the bay, you're not going to see the bottom of it unless it's a really nice, clear day. I haven't lived here for, I visit on long spurts here and there, and I've never seen a clear day in the bay. But I have, there may be some. Let me know what your experience is. Would love to hear more about it. Now, everything was very idyllic here. There was enough food, there was enough water, there was enough clean nature to sustain all of the tribes. Then one day came a knocking, colonialization. And the colonialists were Columbus and Ponce de Leon. And this would just be the beginning of a long line of conquerors that would destroy the tribes that had lived here, the life that had been here, and the nature that everybody had depended on for so long. This also includes, by the way, DeSoto. DeSoto County is named after. So when we come back into our history, we find that one of the biggest issues here is that the colonialists showed up and they did not want to see what was happening and move on. They wanted to take over the land. As a matter of fact, in Columbus's first diary, he mentions that the natives are so nice that he should be able to colonize and take them all over with, I think, about 50 men, he thought. So, and then they proceeded to destroy all of the tribes and all the tribe cultures. Terrible, terrible genocides that were witnessed here. And this is what was the big changing of the landscape. Now, this was way, way, way back then. You had Spanish and settlement, and then you had English settlers. You had a lot of different settlers coming in. You have the French, of course, that are the neighbors to the left. And we all have to remember that they owned almost all of America until the Louisiana Purchase. So it was a lot of different textures that created the things that were here. And everybody was able to live in the nature as it was. And this, again, we want to bring this up because this is the nature in everyone's mind. If you're coming here on vacation, you're going to imagine scuba diving with your loved one, just the two of you in this open reef. You know, if you're a fisherman, you're going to imagine fishing. You have this whole ocean of fish. We live in this conceptualized version of the past, as opposed to, unfortunately, the modern water world that we live in. And again, guys, everybody, this is a live conversations here. I want to remind you, please jump in, tell us what's happening. We want to know what's going on everywhere, because this is a topic that affects the entire state. So unfortunately, colonialization came in, did not fare well for any of the tribes that lived here. Columbus, terrible, terrible disaster for the tribes that lived here. Ponce de Leon, terrible, terrible tragedy for all of the tribes that lived here. And Ponce de Leon, we have to blame him for one of the biggest confusions in Florida today. Where is his fountain of youth? Every town seems to have it. So just on a lighter note, but it was a very tragic thing that changed how the land was used. Up until then, there was a belief that the land was not ownable. You can't own it. It's not yours. You use it, you borrow it, you share it, but then you rebuild it and you respect it and you replant it and you continue it, because your life is dependent on nature. That all changed around the 1800s, late 1800s. So here we come. Now we come in the big three. Now skip ahead a few hundred years, and what we have is industry. The Industrial Revolution, the beginning of the 1900s. This is the big changer. Now you had phosphate mines all dotted around in the 1800s here. People were digging up phosphate rocks the size of my head. You know, that was really exciting for everybody. But that is because most of the phosphates buried way deep down. They didn't have the technology to get deep down, so they were digging in the higher up stratospheres. So the land was starting to be upturned in the upper aspects of the land itself, until industrialization happened and they were able to start bringing in machines to drill. And once they brought in machines to drill, they were getting in very deep. Then they're bringing in minerals and things from the very bottom all the way up to the ground. I added some construction sound effects. There's a case anybody's listening, and this is not their audiobook. Florida, by the way, is one of the loudest places I've been, aside from the Amazon. I don't get it. It's supposed to be this tranquil, quiet place. It's so loud. There's so much construction. I don't know. It's just there's a lot of things that are going on. Okay. Anyway, back to what we were talking about, because this is super important. Phosphate mining started to upturn and bring out minerals and also radiation, things that people in the 1900s were in literally no way ready to even comprehend. Kind of like, the modern world and COVID. It's very confusing for everybody. They can't see radiation. What is it? It must not exist. There was a lot of confusion, and as a result of that, a lot of bad decisions happened and continue to happen in the same vein. Because unlike before, where people just didn't know, now Florida, unfortunately, is one of the most corrupt states in America, which means that these industries, the big three, the first one is the phosphate industry, gets to do whatever they want because they pay off their politicians. They do it legally through PACs and other things, but they pay off their politicians and own them. You will never find state to vote against any phosphate initiatives. They will bend over backwards to ensure that Mosaic gets what Mosaic wants. Now, this means that the rest of us get cancers and sicknesses. So this is the part that we want to change because it's no good. So we started with early phosphate mining. When I say early phosphate, I'm talking about this. This is a guy holding a dinosaur bone 10 feet that they found 10 feet under the ground, because this is early mining. Now here's an early mining as well. Again, it did not go too deep. It did not pull up uranium and other heavy metals from lower down, and its effect is not that massive. Now you go through Florida and you will see one of these types of cranes used all around Florida, and this is what one of the main destroyers of Florida. Again, I wanted to show everybody right here, by the way, this is the phosphate map of Florida. That's the sound. That's my drag line sound effect, so you guys can keep it in course here. And we're focusing right now on the red part that's down there. That is an area they call Bone Valley. In that area, Mosaic has dominated, taken over about 300,000 acres of or so, which is roughly the size of Los Angeles. And in that area, you have the highest rates of cancer, including in those counties, very often the highest reasons for cancer. The highest reasons for death being cancer. You also have politicians that will not acknowledge it, that work for Mosaic, not for their neighbors, and we see that a lot with the residents everywhere. So you've got not Mosaic originally; they came in later. You've got phosphate mining. There's number one. Now, why is phosphate mining so important? Imagine this right now, because this is what I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the water. So in Florida, the biggest users of fresh water. It's agriculture, industry, power plants, public water sectors, which means your drinking water. Now, I think it's weird. Industry, quote unquote, as they call it, would be the space industry, the mining industry, and a few other industries that are very bad players in the environment that don't want to necessarily be named. Now, according to information that we were just studying, around 7 billion gallons of fresh water are used daily across these sectors. Now, we don't know exactly the amount of water for everything, but we do know that Mosaic has the permission to take over 100 million gallons of groundwater every day, take it from your rivers, run it through the machines, get the heavy metals attached to it, pull out, get the uranium in it, and pop it back into your water supply. Then your water supply goes to your local water municipality for your drinking water. Please keep in mind that the groundwater tends to be where a lot of communities get their water, not from the aquifer. In Florida, it's a little different. Aquifer is mostly designed for industrial use. That's your orange growers, that's your miners, that's your agriculture. The aquifer is mostly designed as this wide distribution of industry. And most people, their water comes from the river. Peace River, Coosawhatchee, a lot of other rivers have these water processing plants on the river themselves, and they suck the water in, clean it out, and it goes, or they're recycling toilet water, gray water, other forms of water. So it is, again, complex, where your politicians have sold you out to industry, and you don't even have access to a natural giant underwater reservoir. If you did, maybe your water would be free, huh? All the time, instead of now everybody having to buy water, where they give Nestle, what was it? Would they allow them to take? I can't remember the exact amount of fresh water either, but now you know that they're not taking the freshest of water. That's being passed off as Nestle drinking water, stuff with uranium, heavy metals, all kinds of horrible things in it. They do run them through processing, but that processing cannot remove a big chunk of it, which is why a lot of drinking waters, if you go and you test them, and we encourage everybody to check your local water, your drinking water will have either a lot of formaldehyde or a lot of chlorine. Those are two of the maskers of compounds that they can't pull out. They can't pull out a heavy metal or something that's known to give people cancer. They'll add in these masker chemicals, and those mask chemicals run higher. So if you see those chemicals high, that means they're hiding something from you. Remember, if the masking chemicals are high, your local officials are hiding some form of toxic exposure to you. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit more now. So that's the phosphate mining industry. We're going to do a way deeper dive in another episode. Again, this is an introductory. We want to talk about how pristine the water was back in the day, how perfect it was, and how it is now the second worst water to drink in the United States. Why do you think that is? Let me know your comments. I really want to know. Do you think it's the politicians? Do you think it's industry? Do you think it is just natural? Like the water just has eroded over time? Let me know what your thoughts are. One thing about the water that I did want to mention really fast, when we went to do the movie Phosphate, we took random water samples from each body of water south of separate mines. So there's, say, 3 separate mines. Each of them dump into separate bodies of water. We took water tests from each of those. We found the same level of phosphate pretty much across all of them, which would mean that it's not natural. You can't have multiple bodies of water hitting the exact same pH levels range. That's impossible because that's not how, those aren't the levels that they would be found in nature. So they're not the natural levels. So we were able to deduce that all of these, there's about 2 or 3 of these mosaic mines, all the water comes down south. And all of that has been treated and released back in. Now, we went out to do water tests, and when we did water tests, we checked for total dissolved oxygen, which is something that teaches you if fish can live in the water. And if there's not enough oxygen, fish can't live in the water. And if they can't live in the water, it's a term they use called hypoxia. Now, we found that in every river was hypoxic. We were in smaller rivers. Obviously, there's fish in the Peace River. But if you go into your smaller tributaries, you're not going to see fish. So I'm really curious about everyone's idea about that as well, because as we continue through this, we want to talk about how the water flows, because when they take the water and return the water, that's the water we get. We get secondhand water. We don't get real water. We get the secondhand water. So let's know who is dipping their fingers in the cookie jar of our health and see what's going on here. So number 1 is phosphate mining, very bad player. Number 2 is agriculture. Now, agriculture is the second largest use of water in Florida. This is incredible. I was reading that it accounts for about 34% of all the freshwater withdrawals. And they estimate that at around 2,000 million gallons per day. So agriculture is taking your water. Are they sharing their profits with you? Are you happy for them? Does it matter? They're stealing your water and you're paying the price with your health and your pocketbook because your politicians want more money from their PACs. That's what's happened to Florida's water. We keep talking about this a little bit. Now, there's a lot of aspects to agriculture. There is, number 1, farms where you've got chickens, you have cows. There is a ranch called the Deseret Ranch right by Lake O. It is owned by Mormons, a Mormon group, and they have about 300,000 acres as well. Again, roughly the size of Los Angeles, roughly the size of what Mosaic's taken in their land quest. Now, this land is a whole plethora of problems, because first you have runoff. You have runoff from like chicken poop, cow poop, which, as we all know, can lead to salmonella, E. coli, and a few other issues. So you've got farms that are not necessarily that well regulated. Actually, now they're not regulated at all, and they're dumping what they want into the water. And have you ever wondered, how does a head of lettuce get E. coli? That's how. It comes from the chicken poop, it gets into the gray water, and the gray water is then used by farms trying to be cheap back into the growing of produce, which then converts, and it's sort of another version of a zoonotic thing, but that's a whole other topic for us to go through. The big player in agriculture, so you've got the farms, you've got them using all of this mosaic fertilizer, which then runs back into the water. There was a big campaign, don't use fertilizer on your lawn. Fantastic. Won't make big difference if over 300,000 acres is being soiled with this stuff and it's being dumped into your drinking water. So you need to hold other people responsible as well. It can't just be that if there's a problem, it's your fault. That's a weird way of thinking that the corporations invented in the 50s. We have to stop this way of thinking. We have bad players that are killing us, all of us around the nation, with putting these chemicals back into the water and giving us excessive toxic exposures. And one of them is big sugar. Now, a lot of people know about Lake O. They know about big sugar out here. For the people that are just tuning in or want to talk a little bit more about it, you have a lot of, basically, Lake Okeechobee is bordered by a lot of different runoff lands, whether it's this type of agriculture, sugar, the farm above. So it's all coming into there. Now, just like we talked about all the water south of Mosaic having the same personality, showing us that it's treated water. What they've done in Florida was to take Lake O and remove the runoff into east and west channels, sending it into the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, respectively. It used to just naturally go south, where the Everglades worked in harmony with the natural amount of problems that water faces naturally, and filter it all out before returning it back into our big shared resource of ocean. That has been changed by man as a result of what's happening. And another problem with big sugar, by the way, is these burn-offs. Once they have done their harvesting, they burn it off, and all of these fumes go into local communities and give a lot of people out there cancers. So it's a massive problem for the land, for the water, and for the communities that surround big sugar. So big sugar, number two, and agriculture, really. So we have number one and number two. We have phosphate binding, which basically has a blank check to pollute as they want in Florida. And we're seeing the results of it. One last thing about phosphate mining that I want to mention before we move on is phosphate acts as a miracle grow for red tide through eutrophication, which we'll go into in our deep dive. But just know this: if you're wondering why algae blooms seem so crazy since around 2016 or so, and everyone I hear in Florida that I meet says, we've never seen this, but they're natural. No, they're not. They're actually being fed. They're natural, but not this size. And they're being fed by Mosaic through extra phosphates coming out through the water, as well as other chemicals. So bad player, terrible for nature, killing all the nature around it and downriver from it, unfortunately. So yes, you have phosphate mining and you have agriculture. Two very, very, very bad players that have destroyed the water quality potentially forever in Florida. Best thing we can do is try to hold them responsible for not continuing at the pace of pollution that they are. And I'd love to know your thoughts on this too. How responsible are they versus the politicians? What do you think? Or are they all, as they say, in bed together? I'd like to know what you think about that. Now, we want to talk about the third biggest problem that faces Florida water, which is developments, housing. We were just reading there's 10.5 million units of housing in Florida. That's I just can't even wrap my head around that. Now, the development started very early on, and here actually is one of these signs that you would have seen. Now that oceanfront riparian rights, and for $800 and up, crazy, huh? Now, I don't know what protective restrictions means. I have a feeling that's part of the old racist housing code. And they used to have racist codes built into deeds. It's actually a thing. It's crazy. You should Google it. Don't take my word for it. As a matter of fact, Florida, they're still trying to make a push to remove them from a lot of deeds that have been handed down. So that was back then. So it was like basically that was waterfront, gated, whites only community back then. So you already started with housing segregation was born into the concepts of leases and deeds. Now this becomes a big problem because as things go on, corporations and industries will take advantage of this. But again, that's for another deeper dive. We want to talk about housing and how this has affected everything. Now, when you think about water use, you think about all of the homes that need showers, just even water coming out of their back spigot. So you have a massive pull, 10.5 million units approximately, pulling water. There's that water. Now that's the very, very leftover water. So your first water goes to the highest bidder. It doesn't matter who. Let's just say it's agriculture. Second highest bidder, Mosaic. Then it goes to your third highest bidder, which is to make sure that they can keep building. Now in Florida, they're trying to build more and more and more. Do you think Florida's nature can sustain more people? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because it is a big changing of the landscape that's occurred. So it's an amazing. So again, Florida, the most amazing nature and the most amazing, places that I've seen. And we have gone to springs and parts of the Everglades that just blow your mind and feed your soul in a way no other place can on earth. But unfortunately, you have some of the most corrupt politicians, as proven by a Harvard study, and you have some of the most, environmentally difficult industries. And they're all industries that people could argue are very important. We're not arguing they're not important industries. People have to live somewhere. You need water. We need to grow food. Absolutely. We do need fertilizer. Do we need phosphate pre-made fertilizer? That's a different discussion. Actually, there's a lot of natural things, because how did the world feed itself before Mosaic showed up? Mosaic doesn't know, but we do. We'll talk about it later on. So again, today, I would love to hear again more of people's thoughts on what you think we can do to restore Florida to its natural beauty, the beauty that lives in everybody's mind, the beauty that everybody comes down here for, the beauty that is Florida conceptually, perhaps not Florida in reality. So these are your big three. And I see Edmonton Valley Zoo Lucy. Hey, thank you for joining. Is anyone in government concerned about this issue? That is an awesome question. From what we can tell, no, absolutely not. These politicians, as a matter of fact, most recently, one of them locally who takes money from the phosphate industry went on a smear campaign against our documentary to try to label us in a completely false way and try to discredit us. So they're always working at it. Now, the politicians, before DeSantis, you had Rick Scott. And Rick Scott basically eliminated the procedure for getting a permit. It's almost nothing now. It's sort of like more of a handshake than a permit process, which, by the way, now that's deleted. So things are just going to get worse from here. That's why it's important we talk about it, because nothing's going to get better at the moment. Every single environmental policy we're seeing put on the table is going to destroy what's left of what we have. It's more important than ever that we talk about and make these changes. So the politicians in Florida, now this is probably a very standard thing. I would imagine everywhere. I want to see what everybody thinks. What you have is, for example, you have lawyers for Mosaic who go and get the permits and fight all the environmental groups. Then they go through a revolving door and get put into the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And I can't even make this up. Guess what they do? That particular lawyer that I'm talking about now hands out water permits for the FDEP. So you've got a guy who was working for the company. Now that same guy's working for the government, handing out permits like they're candy. It's very challenging to get permits stopped. As a matter of fact, DeSoto is one of the few places that's managed to do it. And that's what the movie is about. It's about their victory because Mosaic is coming back. So they've been sold out by their politicians. Local politicians have taken money from Mosaic and other companies that have an interest in that area. DeSantis is one of the worst as far as taking money from Mosaic and these other groups. Florida has completely been sold out. And unfortunately, they have a long line of of voting back in the exact same person that they just had, which environmentally is causing the biggest disaster in any of the states we've seen. The only reason is we're not talking about it more is that Florida has a great PR team. Think about this. When red tide hit heavy, they suppressed it. And I remember because people were posting about it and those posts were coming down early on. People weren't allowed to talk about it. There was a guy named Chris Grisby that talked about it on the news once, mentioned it in passing, didn't even do a story on it, was fired the next day. Florida has a wall of silence over information that's important. So that leaked out though, because you can't, this modern world, you can't hide stuff. So then the national news found it. As a result of Florida lying about it, the rest of the country didn't trust Florida and their economy tanked. And people lost everything because people didn't understand the risks of red tide. But also there's safe ways to visit Florida when red tide's going on. Now, we don't want to dwell on those because we don't want people injured that are, that have businesses here, that have set their lives up here. These people shouldn't pay the price for an industry's profit. These industries are making billions a year while people are struggling to feed their families. Very often, even having to go to work for the very industries that poison them to death, like phosphate mining. Working in the sugar chemical areas, agriculture. Agriculture is so bad for workers that some of the highest amount of birth deformities occur from agricultural workers in the state of Florida. It's messed up. It's really messed up. How long is Florida going to continue to punch themselves and knock themselves out by voting in a way that's anthemic to the needs of the environment, the communities, and the economy? These industries are not doing anything except taking the money out of the mouths of the workers. So, and even if they don't do anything bad, just having bad environment, having, like we were talking about the sugarcane burns, people that live in those communities now have massive cases of asthma and other things, lung cancer. These people are dying. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with medical bills these days, but they've definitely gone up a lot. So they are killing us with toxic exposure and then destroying us financially. And then actually right now, and by the way, this is something very important. There's something crazy going on in Florida. There is a battle to stop residents from having any say at all that DeSantis is pushing forward. Now, please, if you love DeSantis, this is not about DeSantis. If you're a Republican, I don't care. If you're a Democrat, I don't care. This is a nonpartisan issue. This is so important. Currently, there is a right to nature, right to clean water movement in Florida that's trying to get enough signatures to be put on the ballot and then let everybody vote. Now, that's how Florida politics works. If you can come up with an absurd amount of signatures, 900,000 in 5 days or whatever, then so you get over this one obstacle that's already ridiculous. And then it gets to the part where it gets on the ballot and everybody gets to vote. Okay, so you get to bypass the government if you have enough citizens and residents saying, we want to change. That is one of the most important aspects of what makes Florida free. It's what makes residents strong. It's what everybody on either side of the aisle come down to Florida to have that form of freedom, that their voice matters. Well, guess what? DeSantis is trying to choke you out and cut out your vocal cords, because they're trying to pass something right now that would eliminate any citizen measures that come through ballot style. So that would actually destroy all citizen input. And if that's not crazy enough, they're putting forward to try to end the Sunshine Law. Now, the Sunshine Law in Florida is one of Florida's, it's necessary because it's so corrupt that they're not supposed to do any discussion about anything government related, business related, in any way related to politics outside of people's view. No closed meetings. Now, places like Titusville and other places completely demolished that and locked their own residents out of meetings to quickly pass through things. This is not politics. These are fraudsters stealing your rights. Stop voting for them and vote for something that will be different. As we always say on our shows, stop looking at the environment through your political party's talking points. It's essential that you judge every politician based on their environmental voting record, or we're doomed. And that holds true for Florida. So, hey, Addison, here's Addison. Here's somebody that understands that we can also change this political force in our state. How are you today? Let's see. Born and raised in Florida, and I've never seen it good, sadly. Well, Addison, we have seen your efforts. You're out there always fighting for a better Florida. And I have a good feeling that you will see it good in a short period of time, because there's a lot of people out there that want to see the water back into their hands, want to see the water clean again. And Addison, the work you're doing out there and being so proactive to try to fight for the environment is what's going to save it. And Florida needs a million more Addisons out there fighting for the state. So thank you for everything you're doing for nature, because it's going to make a big impact. And you are so young that unfortunately you probably haven't been around when Florida was at its finest. And I think a lot of people might be able to say that, because Florida's had water problems for so long. Now, the Gulf of Mexico, of course, that is the largest dead zone in the world. Part of it comes from the runoff that comes off of Florida. Part of it comes from the runoff that comes from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and all the other areas as well. So we need to fix all of it. Personally, Sierra and I are vegan. We don't eat fish, but we see a lot of our friends that do. And friends, please don't eat any fish from the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico is a dead zone. First of all, that means it's hypoxic, which means if you think you might be getting certain fish out of the Gulf, you might want to have it tested, because there is a potential that you're getting fish fraud, and maybe they're mislabeling the fish. Because what is living in the world's largest dead zone? Now, recently, and again, I want to illustrate this with some more facts. Recently, Louisiana had a seafood festival, and they found that an NGO went in and found out that like 80 to 90% of the shrimp served there was actually imported from overseas. Why? I mean, I was out all day with a guy who was a shrimper in Louisiana, and I can tell you why. Everything's dying in the Gulf. Let's not let that be our conclusion. We have the amazing springs here. We have amazing lakes. We have a lot of things that definitely can be saved. Yes, thank you. Well, definitely. We should all try to do like a beach cleanup. We were actually talking about trying to get together with Stella and Elizabeth, and let's get a couple friends together and do that. I think it would be great, because unification is the key. These industries have unified. We need to unify in order to help fight for our water. We're the voice for clean water. And there are so many amazing people out here fighting for clean water. I don't want to undercut that at all. Honestly, Florida has the most amazing activists we've ever seen. And if anyone has a chance of becoming an example of how you can take back your clean water, it's Florida. Anybody can become a shining example of what to do. It's Florida, instead of being an example of what not to do. Okay. Oh, awesome. Adopted area. Fantastic. Okay. Well, let's do that. Let's set that up and we'll make it an event, and let's meet as many of our water friends as we can with a fun beach cleanup together. I think that'd be great, because it really, there's nothing better than the feeling of when you're done and you look at everything you've taken off the beach and you know that you have saved an animal, because every piece of plastic on there will kill one, if not multiple. So, so important, such an important thing to do. So anyway, everybody, this was our first episode of Water Talks. Thank you, Addison, for joining us. Thank you for Sierra for being here today, talking to us also about your experience and why you wanted to start this series. Wanted to just kind of wrap up. We all talked together. Hey, Barbara, thanks for joining us today as well. Today was important to talk about clean water. Here we go. I wanted to put Sierra back on the spot and talk a little bit more about clean water, and ask you, Sierra, as a native, as Addison was saying also, she hasn't seen the clean water and you have. What do you hope to see for our waters, and how do you think conversations can help?
Sorry about
that.
That's okay. Yeah, so I think it's really important that people just take a look around and see what their water is like. I mean, it's just so important to just pay attention. I think number one, pay attention to what's going on. And number two, I think it's important people get involved in whatever way that it's comfortable for them, or how they would like to, or whatever their abilities are. Just water is so important. It supports every aspect of our life, from tourism to the very water we put in our bodies. So I think it's just really important for people to pay attention, get involved, test their water. That's super important as well. Know what's in your water, know what's going into your bodies of you and your family. That way you can make decisions on how to use your water if it's contaminated. So we'll be talking more about water testing and stuff like that in further episodes. But I just think those are 3 things that people can do to help improve the water quality, not only for themselves, but for everybody. So, yeah.
Perfectly said. And, while we're talking about it, we always ask, what's in your water? Excuse me. That is it's the number one place to start. And there's 2 great ways to check. One, you can go to the Environmental Working Group. It's ewg.org, and they have a database. They tested the entire nation's tap water. Now, well water, they don't really have, I don't think they have anything tested for that, but you can test your tap water, and you can look at what they found. And if you're still curious, you can get testing. And there's all kinds of different testing. And like Sierra said, we're going to talk more about that, because we want everybody to know the information is right there for you to have. So number one, what's in your water? What's coming into contact with you and your family? Start at ewg.org. It's free. It will give you a basis of where to work from and to look around the areas that may be having some issues around there as well. And I would love to see what everybody finds and talk about it more in these upcoming episodes, because like I said, every episode, we just want to do a deep dive in. We want to talk about a lot of aspects and how we can clean the water everywhere. And Barbara says, I'm in New Hampshire, but I'm very concerned about what Felon 47's deregulation of all agencies will do to our water, our food, and our air. Very important issue. And I would say, Barbara, it's a really great point that you make. Right now, we have all been struggling to keep the environment as clean as we can. And we're seeing the EPA get decimated, and we're watching deregulation. As a matter of fact, we know that if any company shows up with a certain amount of money, they have been promised a fully deregulated process. It's frightening. It's a bad example for the rest of the world too, but hopefully it won't last. This is the stress test against the system. This is the stress test against all of our victories so far. If all of our victories so far can be eliminated in one day, then we have to start having bigger, deeper conversations about the very foundation upon which we're building our governments on. Because this cannot be a quote unquote democracy for and by the people if the people don't have a voice. At the moment, it's a huge danger for the environment. So I am curious to see as well, to just hit more on what Barbara was saying. I would love to hear what everybody's thoughts are on that. What is deregulation? Because, Sierra and I were talking about the fact that, like, what people call regulations and red tape, we call controls for health. I'm sorry, but Mosaic not allowed to dump as much radioactivity as they want in the water. That's a good thing. And if that makes me a weirdo because that's our regulation, so be it. I hope none of you other people have the environmental cancer I have. And until you have it, maybe you're not going to understand exactly how important this is. But to me, it's stupid to think that a company that needs to make as much money as they can will regulate themselves. We've never seen it happen. Best management practices is a terrible idea that we've seen fail over and over and over. Addison says, someday when I'm president, this will no longer happen. Money should not be involved. We should be doing what's best for the people. Absolutely, Addison, absolutely. I'm so refreshing to hear you say that. Because, we're a capitalist society, but some things have to be money oriented and some things can't be, just like we can't expect people that are born with disadvantages to have to go out and engage in the same type of lives. We know that we need to help them. Addison, it's interesting. Okay. I'm curious again. I love these discussions and I want to hear more from everybody. I happen to believe, and Sierra, can I bring you on for this? I want to get your impression if you'd like to join in. Addison as well. And Addison, we'd actually like for you to be a guest on a future show because we'd like to talk to you about all the efforts you're doing. So we'll send over a message and let's get a show connected. Now, people have this concept that capitalism is built on greed. That humanity is built on greed. That somehow we were all at serfdom, and then, which by the way was run by greed, and then somehow greed pulled us out of the mud. Okay, so that's one theory. I don't believe that. I believe that actually what is true human nature is cooperation, not competition. So, and we see that in any disaster. Next hurricane, you see an old lady and a kitty sitting on their roof crying for help. You're going to see some guy hollow out a tire and get over there and save them, even if it means he loses his own life, because people are genuinely at their core good, I think. And I'm curious, Sarah, your thoughts on this as well, because the idea is that by doing good, maybe we can create more good. That money doesn't always have to be at the expense of somebody else.
Yeah. Through our travels and sorry, I
just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Okay. Through traveling around and seeing different
cultures, seeing different places, and just seeing the cooperation from people in different areas. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here. So yeah, it's really not doing so well as we might think of in our standards for the US. It's yeah, they know that cooperation is essential, and it's something that is really beautiful in the human. A yacht. You don't need all of that. So, yeah. So that's just how I feel about it.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. There's nothing I can add to that. I think you summed it up really perfectly. And I find that with a lot of activists, we understand community because we want to change the world through one way of being, and that way is love and compassion. And like Addison says, I think most people are good, but I was raised to be the person that helps. My parents are those people. That is beautiful because that's what it takes. You pass on the love, you pass on the compassion, and it burns brighter every time you pass it on to anybody. Because that's the only time that it's activated in us is when it's shared with other people. So, together, I think we're the solution. We are all the solution. We can't let 7 people ruin the state for the rest of us. So this is very exciting that we're going to start doing talks. We're going to start doing weekly chats. Let's all get together. Let's all talk about what's on your mind, what's going on with your water, what's upsetting you. Tell us about your victories. This is about the water of Florida. And there's a million parts of the water. There's a million stories and a million emotions. And we want to hear them all because we want to know how can we do this better? And the only way is through open, honest dialogue. And that dialogue sometimes is going to be uncomfortable. So we're encouraging everybody that totally disagrees. Anybody's looking at his screen right now going, Eric, you're an idiot. Please join our show. Talk to me. Tell me why you think that. Because if we're just in our separate corners, we're not going to get anywhere. Hey, and I see Jaleel, our buddy Jaleel is here. Good to see you, man. Hope you guys are having a great 2025. And Addison says, if people see us out doing good, my hope is that they join me. Absolutely. Absolutely. As the expression always goes, be the change you want to see in the world. And Addison, you're doing that. And a lot of adults can learn from you as well. So everybody, thank you for joining today. It was a really exciting conversation. We talked about so many different aspects, so many different things, and so many different problems. But in the end, these 3 bad guys we were talking about brings us to our 2 main topics coming up. To throw it out there, which is red tide and nutrient load. And there will be a few other topics as well. But those are 2 things that we see across the board over and over and over, regardless of the bad players. And how does that affect the water quality? It's kind of like biodiversity. You take out one thing and it kind of crumbles everything. So in a lot of ways, each aspect of how the water lives is a keystone. Water is our keystone species we must keep alive. So thanks, everybody. Great to see you all here today. Thank you for coming in. It's so important. We want to stop the cancer. We want to improve the health. We want to improve the health of the environment. We want to see the world thrive. We want to see the future thrive. And there's only one way we're going to do that. And I think a lot of us know we're not necessarily headed down that road right now. We can turn it around. All right, everybody. Thanks again. And we can't wait to see you next week for another Water Talks. Have a